Hello. On behalf of the Newhouse Center for the Humanities, I'm happy to welcome you all here this afternoon to hear Francisco Goldman read in the last installment of this fall season of the Distinguished Writer Series. Don't worry, we've got a great lineup already on tap for the spring, including Pico Iyer, Jim Shepard, Tom Slay, and Jennifer Egan. So stay tuned for the spring schedule. If you are not on our mailing list and want to be, we have a little form out there you can fill out. So I'm really excited to introduce our host for today's reading, Junot Díaz, who comes to us all the way from MIT, where he's taught creative writing since 2003. Junot Díaz has published short stories in the New Yorker, Story, and the Paris Review, but took the world by storm with publication of his novel, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde in 2007, which won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, as well as the National Book Critics Circle Award. In her New York Times book review, Michiko Kakutani called the book, quote, a wondrous, not so brief, first novel that's so original it can only be described as Mario Vargas Llosa meets Star Trek, meets David Foster Wallace, meets Kanye West. She goes on to praise the novel's adrenaline-powered prose, noting its madcap magpie voice that's equally at home, talking about Tolkien and Trujillo, anime movies and ancient Dominican curses, sexual shenanigans at Rutgers, and secret police raids in Santo Domingo. It took Junot Díaz 11 years to write The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, and in an essay called On Becoming a Writer, he offers a tale of extended writer's block that should warm the heart of all the would-be, will-be writers in the room. After detailing his difficulties in getting past page 75, he concludes the essay not with the breakthrough, rocky moment that we've come to expect from the movies, the moment when the novel starts writing itself, but rather with a tribute to the never-ending practice of writing. He says, you see, in my view, a writer is a writer not because she writes well and easily, because she has amazing talent, because everything she does is golden. In my view, a writer is a writer because even when there is no hope, even when nothing you do shows any sign of promise, you keep writing anyway. It's precisely because of this appreciation and dedication to the craft and the practice of writing that I'm thrilled to have Junot Díaz here hosting this afternoon's reading and conversation. So I'll hand things over to him, who will then introduce Francisco Goldman. Mr. Goldman will read, and then the two of them will have a brief conversation about reading and writing before we open it up to questions from the audience. Finally, we'll have books for sale after the reading and available to be bought and to be signed. So thank you very much, and Junot Díaz.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. See, my absolute favorite writer. Yeah. So good to see you all here. I wanted to thank the school, of course, for having us. It's one of the things, of course, that is an enormous comfort and inspiration is how much the college supports not only the arts in the main, but most specifically the literary arts. As we all know, it's not something that all institutions, it's not an enthusiasm that all institutions share equally. And for this community, the college has played an enormous role in ensuring access to a wide variety of the arts. And for that commitment, we're all beneficiaries, yeah? So I wanted to thank, of course, the school for inviting me to introduce who I really is truly a friend and indeed my favorite writer. You know, it's these strange kind of Anglo-Saxon formalisms, yeah? The introduction followed by the fireside chat. You know, when y'all know you can ask better questions than I ever could, yeah? But these things have their purpose, I have been told. And so we honor the charge given to us, yeah? And you know, there's a number of genres by which we can approach introductions. There's the, you know, the accreditational, a list of nonsense that you've gained. Yeah, there's the personal, you know, how we grew up together. Yeah. And then, of course, there's the contextual, where you strive to somehow embed the artist in question in a matrix of value. Yeah. So we're going to try to do all three very briefly, because you figure you spread your shit around and nobody can blame you if you specifically mess up on one. Okay? The personal, of course, is Francisco Goldman is an old friend of mine. He's perhaps the writer that is most important to me, not only as a practitioner of various genres, journalism, fiction, literary essays, and of course confessional writing, but also as a tireless supporter of Latin American and U.S. Latino writers. His support of me was instrumental in getting me to continue to write my very difficult novel. He, in fact, pulled me to Mexico City for almost a year, where I lived as his neighbor. And I've got to tell you, man, spend a year with Frank Goldman writing in Mexico City, and if you can't pull some shit off, it is never going to happen. You know, he's really an enormous inspiration because of his multiple dedications. Those of you who know the work of Frank Goldman know that he pursues the various crafts with equal diligence and equal courage. And I kind of still remember Frank, you know, almost every day, getting up, hitting that work, and then reminding me that the work is only as useful as your sort of commitment to life and to the world. Yeah, I have so many of my students who want to write as a way to short circuit an engagement with the world. They think they write first and then the world later. I call them my little dentists. You know, anyone who teaches creative writing knows the dentists I talk about. My little dentists, they're the ones who want to finish undergraduate, take maybe 12 minutes off and go right to grad school. Everything to short circuit the world, yeah? Where of course we know that art only comes from an engagement with the world, mostly by being lost. So I was just going to read the bona fides and then finish off with a small piece. Francisco Goldman is the author of 4 books, 3 works of fiction, The Long Night of White Chicken, The Ordinary Seaman, and Divine Husband, and 5, and 1 work of nonfiction, The Art of Political Murder, and of course his latest extraordinary novel, Say Her Name. His first novel was awarded the Sue Kaufman Prize for First Fiction from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. The Ordinary Seaman, his second novel, was finalist for the International IMPAC Dublin Literary Award and the Los Angeles Times Book Prize in Fiction. The Art of Political Murder was a New York Times Notable Book of 2007 and a Washington Post Book World 100 Best Books of 2007. He has been the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and is a fellow at the New York Public Library Center for Scholars and Writers, and he is currently the Alan K. Smith Professor of English at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. His fiction and journalism have appeared in The New Yorker, Harper's, The New York Times Magazine, Esquire, The New York Review of Books, Outside, and many other publications. He lives between both in New York City and Mexico City. And finally, if you'll forgive some exaggeration, or at least sort of, beginner's passion, I say, as a writer, Francisco Goldman is a model of the life extraordinary. It is a life extraordinary in courage and in resilience. As a journalist who covered the wars in Central America in the 80s and continues to this very day to follow the story of trauma-scarred societies haunted by the legacies of torture, terror, and political violence, Francisco Goldman's work is absolutely essential. As a novelist who in 4 important novels has indelibly mapped what it is to be Latin America and U.S. Latino in the endless age of heartbreak that is our history, Frank's work is absolutely essential. It reminds us how profoundly implicated we all are in what happens around us. It reminds us that you cannot have a cozy domestic tale of suburban Massachusetts woe without a young murdered woman in a morgue in Guatemala City. One ties silently, invisibly to the other, whether you wish to recognize it or not. The work of Francisco Goldman delivers the kind of truths without which we cannot know our human selves, without which we cannot know our world. It takes courage to write as Goldman does, but my God, are we not glad when someone out there can do it? Frank is a model for any writer who strikes out in a different direction and who would place an engagement with the world far ahead of an MFA degree, who would place the pursuit of human justice ahead of competition and prizes. I know no other writer who I consider more necessary, more insane, more beautiful, and more true. What makes Goldman to me endlessly fascinating is not the extraordinary power of his prose, the singular, searching intelligence of his art, the America that he reveals at the edges of its empire, whether it is in Guatemala or the docks of Brooklyn. It is not his piercing journalistic fearlessness or the profound humanity that he shines forth in his confessional writings. It is not the erudition and insight he brings to bear in his literary essays. What makes Goldman fascinating to me is that all of these talents reside so powerfully, so effortlessly in one man, and that none of these practices, as of yet, has been able to eclipse the other. Journalist and novelist and essayist and memoirist, all these things simultaneously, brilliantly, and that is Francisco Goldman. Thank you. I'd like to bring Frank up.
Thanks, Junot. He's one of the people I most love in the world. I shouldn't even read. We could just stand up here and just tell you stories about things we've done together and experiences we've had. You should have seen how he saved my wedding. Because I carelessly, I didn't know what, now I don't even remember what they're called. It's what? Ese huella que querían, ese con la estampa. Yeah. What is that called? I thought that I needed for my wedding, to get okayed for my wedding to Auda in Mexico. And I thought, oh, well, my birth certificate has a stamp. You know, that should be fine. And I got down there and they were like, no way, this does not count. You can only get these from the State Department. But the office of the State Department in the Massachusetts State House. I started getting married in 2 days. And I remember I frantically, because he couldn't come down for the wedding for some reason. And he said, I remember his email to this day, Frankie G, I'm right on it, taking a whole bunch of crack. and he went with this team. First they had to get my birth certificate, right? And I remember him calling me up and saying, Frankie G, that's what he calls me. If you look at they want to know what elementary school you went to. Thank God I remembered. I went to school right here in Needham. I said Hillcrest, right? And then when you found that the first name was blank, right? Yeah. My parents hadn't agreed on a first name yet, and well, miraculously he saved. That was just one of the things I had wrong. I can't believe, in the end, we were alive. Really, the morning of our wedding, I was still pretty sure it wasn't going to happen, that we were just going to throw a very expensive party. You know, if you read the book, you'll see one of the themes that runs through it is how bad Auda and I are, anything having to do with official papers, or it's one calamity after another. Do you still get pestered by groups of junior high boys on bicycles who invade the Wellesley College campus and live in a fantasy world that suddenly some Wellesley College freshman is going to fall in love with a 13-year-old kid on his bicycle because that used to be me over here. And then it got worse as time got by. I mean, we were really, like this, I just had to go over. It was like going to a shrine to go to Schneider Hall. I could tell you like years all through my adolescence, from the very puerile, to being in junior high and being up in the top little thing and trying to drop Jello down on people's head, to things that the driver who picked me up today said I shouldn't mention because the campus police might still have a warrant out on me. But it's it's just some really crazy things happened over there. My mother remembered one of them this morning. I was with my mother, and she said, "That's where you and your friend stole that television." She was pretty mad about that because we tried to store it in our garage. It's like, "Where'd you get this television?" "The Schneider Hall." Anyway, we just was a dare. We said, if we pick this up and carry it out, do you think anyone will stop us? And if someone tries to stop us, just say we're repairmen. And we were like 15. So it worked. It's crazy. I'm going to read from Say Her Name. It's really a radical change in mood, but this is my new book. A few things to know before I start. I'm just going to read one chapter out. That was my wife, of course. She died in the summer of 2007. Broke her neck body surfing in the coast of Oaxaca. She was an extraordinarily brilliant girl. Junot knew her. We had some great times together. She was from Mexico City. She was getting her PhD in Latin American literature at Columbia University. And I guess, you read the book, you find out why that was kind of a struggle for her. Because what she really burned to do was to be a fiction writer. And, I mean, she had every scholarship on earth, the Fulbright, the Mexican government scholarship. She'd come out of the UNAM, the public university. And, but she really didn't want to be an academic because she really burned to be a writer. And you actually, this gets told in the book. It's, I no disrespect at all to the department at Columbia in Spanish language and Portuguese literature, but there was a very radical shift going on there that everybody knows about, where they basically were dropping literature for a very extreme cultural studies emphasis. And it's now called, I think, the department, they even changed the name. It's now called the Department of Spanish, Latin American Cultural Studies. They changed the name of the department even. And she just wanted to study literature, and she really wanted to be a fiction writer, like I say. And one day her thesis advisor said to her, "Oh, Aura, you're so innocent. We have to get rid of this naive love you have for literature." And I went, "Oh yeah," And that's when it made her do really the bravest thing she'd ever done, where she, in secret, she'd never written in English before. In secret, she applied to the Hunter College Master of Fine Arts program, which is directed by two really great writers, Peter Carey and Colin McCann. And she got in. It's not easy to get those, but she got in. And that last year of her life, which was so good for, it was such a triumph for her, but so hard, because she could have lost all her scholarships at Columbia if they knew that she was secretly, going to Hunter. We used to call it the Casa Grande and the Casa Chica. It's, in Spanish, like the Casa Grande is where a man will live with his wife, and the Casa Chica is the house he puts up for his lover. And so Hunter was the Casa Chica, so anyway, I guess that's all you need to know. It's more than you need to know for this chapter. Thank you very much for coming. And again, like I say, it's sad, but I was the funniest person I ever met in my life, and I hope so don't be afraid at some point if you want to laugh, Auda was stuck in a broken elevator in Butler Library. She phoned me in her cell when I was at Wadley. There were other people in the elevator with her, someone urgently ringing the emergency bell. spritzing panic through the phone. I told Auda to stay calm, that surely it would be fixed within minutes, and to call me back as soon as it was. When after 15 minutes or so I hadn't heard from her, I phoned and there was no answer. Class was about to start. We were discussing The Street of Crocodiles, the book she'd have with her at the beach that final day. I didn't turn my phone off. About midway through, I told the students I had to make a call and stepped out. I got her voicemail and left a message asking her to let me know that she was okay. I pictured horrifying scenarios: air running out, Auda gasping, claustrophobic hysteria. Class was a disaster. When it was over and she still didn't answer, I phoned the Columbia switchboard, was transferred and put on hold, until finally someone at campus security told me there'd been no report of a stuck elevator at Butler Library that day. It was as if the elevator had vanished, with Auda and the others inside, and no one had noticed. Within seconds of her call to me, it turned out, the elevator glitch had fixed itself. The door had slid open, and Auda had proceeded directly into the reading room, where she was required to turn off her cell phone. And there she'd stayed studying for several hours, until finally she checked her emails, saw my frantic messages, and remembered. Or that time we had to go to a cocktail party in Manhattan. Auda was at home, and I was a few subway stops closer to Manhattan, down in Dumbo, where I was subletting a friend's inexpensive writing studio for a few months. The plan was that she would take the F train to the York Street stop, find me waiting on the platform, and then we'd ride the next train into Manhattan. One train came, its doors opened, a few people got out, another pulled in several minutes later. The station, winter-trapped inside, was a grimy cement and iron deep freezer. The payphones were broken. My cell phone didn't work down there. Robotic rats on the tracks, eating electricity and iron filings. How could this be happening? We'd timed it. I'd phoned her and said, "All right, I'm ready to go to the station." And she'd said, "Give me 5 more minutes." And so I'd waited 5 more minutes. She's still trying on clothes, I thought, pulling dresses on and taking them off because they're too sexy or too ostentatiously fashionable, or because they show off her breasts too much or reveal her tattoo. She liked the way her most prized dresses, including some of the ones I'd bought for her, looked in the mirror. She just wouldn't wear them out of the apartment. 4 trains had passed. My fingers and feet stung from the cold. My nose was running. I climbed the long stairs out of the station to phone her from the street. I had to walk nearly a block before my phone regained its signal. Wind gusted off the East River, whirling litter like frozen bats. She still didn't answer her cell or our telephone at home. I went back into the station, and as I descended the stairs, I heard coming from far below, like the crash of rough surf, the sound of a train entering or leaving the station. On the platform, looking into the tunnel, I saw the dwindling green lights and orange dot of a Manhattan-bound F train. What if she was on it? I waited another half hour, then climbed out to the street again. I phoned the apartment where the party was, but she wasn't there either. That deja vu sensation of loneliness, bafflement, and sadness is this really happening? Then, I didn't know what else to do. I redescended into the station. If I described all of this to a psychoanalyst as a nightmare I'd had, wouldn't it seem to be about separation and death? What had happened, it turned out, was that Auda had gotten on the train at Carroll Gardens and ridden it only one stop, to Bergen Street, and had waited for me there. She'd confused Bergen with York Street, 2 stops farther on, or had spaced out when I'd told her the plan. Finally, she trudged back toward home, feeling as bewildered and sad as I was, and she stopped into Sweet Melissa for a hot chocolate. Arriving back from abroad to New York airports, we always had to join separate lines at U.S. immigration, even after we were married, with Auda in the much slower line for foreign visitors. I'd always clear passport control well before she did, then wait by the wall in front of her foreigners came out. Sometimes guards would tell me that I couldn't stand there, and I'd retreat to the luggage carousel, but often they left me alone, my knees stirring as the minutes passed, and still Auda hadn't appeared. Finally, I'd see her step up to one of the booths, and I'd feel a new surge of nerves, because what if there was something wrong with her papers again, or the agent was in a bad mood, or just liked to harass Mexicans, and turned her away on the slightest pretext. We'd all heard stories like that. Someone at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico had told Auda over the telephone that even having a Fulbright scholarship was no guarantee anymore of a student visa. What if at any moment, here at the mouth of the gate, she was going to be pulled back and returned to Mexico without even being allowed to speak to me? I rarely got to spy on Auda from afar like that, watching as she obediently pressed her fingers down on the fingerprint scanner and answered questions, meeting the customs officer's eye, smiling or even laughing in response to some remark from him, or else remaining serious and composed. This always brought back memories of being a small boy, watching my mother talking to a policeman who had just given her a parking ticket, or to a bank teller, or to a butcher in Haymarket Square, my awareness of their awareness of my mother's delicate prettiness and foreignness, my own sense of an unbreachable apartness. Until finally, I saw the shrug of the officer's shoulder as he stamped her passport, and within seconds, Auda was walking into my embrace. Moments of temporary separation and absence, and even loss that were like little rehearsals for what was coming. Not premonition, but actual visitations. Death coming through its portal, taking Auda away, putting her back, receding back into its hole. Death, a subway train going the wrong way that you can't get off of because it makes no stops. No stopping for hot chocolate and death. That week after our first Christmas and New Year's together in Mexico, we took a room for 5 nights at a boutique hotel on the beach at Tulum. The first 3 mornings, we wound up having to drive from Tulum to the passport office in Cancun and back again in the afternoon, almost 100 miles each way. Auda had realized, before we left for the beach, that since arriving in Mexico a few weeks before, she'd lost her passport. Tia Lupe express mailed Auda's birth certificate from Guanajuato to the FedEx office in Cancun. Mexican bureaucracy is notorious. Long lines stretching all the way back to the Aztec Empire. Multiple appointments to schedule at this teller window or that counter. Many official forms to buy at those tiny stationery stores, always owned by nice old ladies, to fill in, have notarized, then buy and fill in again because at one window some bureaucrat found one stupid infinitesimal thing filled out incorrectly, then renotarize, and so on. Auda was a veteran of Mexican bureaucracies, the UNAM's being among the worst. It was captivating to witness the unruffled manner with which she endured it all, her serene, polite, and even pleasant interactions with the clerks and secretaries, winning over even the most bristlingly petty or hostile ones. All this opened a window into her temperament, I thought. I loved waiting in those passport office lines with Auda, even though it was how we were spending our Tulum vacation instead of at the beach. Our rental car had a CD player, and at a gasoline station, because I told her I didn't really know his music, Auda bought a CD of Jose Jose's greatest hits. That was the only music we listened to in the long drives between Tulum and Cancun, the same sad ballads her mother had listened to in the terrible tower, weeping over her abandonment. On the Tulum-bound drive, we kept seeing small hand-painted signs directing us to Subway, which must be the name of a Mayan town, I deduced, pronouncing it Subway. I even said, maybe it says Subwaj, and we're not getting a good look at the signs. But no, it was a Y, not a J. For some mysterious reason, someone was trying to lure travelers to Subway. But it turned out to be Quintana Roo's first Subway sandwich franchise, in a small shopping plaza off the highway by a golf club outside Tulum. Auda hardly ever again passed by a Subway anywhere in the world without remarking, "Here's your Pueblo Maya, mi amor, Subway." To reach the beach where our hotel was, we'd turn off the highway onto a long stretch of dirt road, the car hitting the softer surface at nearly highway speed, bouncing and seeming to lift off and float through a brown cloud of churned-up dirt as if riding one prolonged note of Jose Jose's sonorous voice. And that sense of dislocation again, of being propelled through a portal from an in-between world back into the beach town of Tulum. In the end, a bureaucrat at a window finally told Auda she could get her passport only in the state of her permanent residence. Why wasn't she told that on the first day? There is no answer to that question. Auda beside me in bed, What would happen to you, mi amor, if I ever left you? I would die, mi amor, you know that. You would, I know you would die, wouldn't you? I really would. And she laughed with a kind of childish delight and said, or if something happened to me, if it was me. No, Aura, stop. If it was me who died, then I would die too. I would. Aura, don't even say that. You would die, wouldn't you? Ay, mi amor, sadly shaking her head. You are so lucky, Francisco, she would say. You are the luckiest man on earth to have a young, intelligent, talented wife who loves you the way I do. Do you know how lucky you are? I know, mi amor, I'm the luckiest guy alive. You are, Francisco, you really are. I am, I know. And if you're going to be a father at your age, you're going to have to keep yourself in top shape. Babies weigh a lot, you know, and you have to carry them everywhere. That's why I go to the gym so much. I'm getting ready. And you have to pay attention all the time to what's going on around us when we walk in the street. If neither of us is good at paying attention, then I'm not having a baby with you. I know, mi amor, I'll pay attention for both of us, I promise. Every day a ghastly ruin, a ghostly ruin. Every day the ruin of the day that was supposed to have been. Every second on the clock clicking forward, anything I do or see or think, all of it made of ashes and charred shards, the ruins of the future. The life we were going to live, the child we were going to have, the years we were going to spend together. It was as if that life had already occurred millennia ago in a lost secret city deep in the jungle, now crumbled into ruins, overgrown, its inhabitants extinguished, never discovered, their story never told by any human being outside it. A lost city with a lost name that only I remember, Subway. On the 96th Street subway platform where, on the 96th Street subway platform where, after a late lunch at the Columbia Ollies, we were waiting for the express back to Brooklyn, Aura was saying, oh, you know, it's a text that's about the way texts generate discourses among texts, so no reason even to mention author's or authorial intention. Well, okay, I know that's true, but in her class that afternoon, taken up by a discussion of Borges' short story, Pierre Menard, Autor del Quixote, no one had laughed even once. But Frank, she exclaimed, didn't any, I love that. I try that again because only she could say it that way. But Frank, she explained, didn't anybody realize that Borges was being funny when he wrote that story? The story's narrator, she recounted, is a mediocre critic who was indignant because his late friend Pierre Menard was left out of some catalog of important writers assembled by another critic. Okay, but does anyone else agree that Menard was so great? The Baroness and the Countess, they agree, said Aura, both of them friends of Menard and the critic. But they're just the Baroness and the Countess, she exclaimed. And the French Countess, she lives in Wichita or someplace like that now, married to a rich gringo. Don't you think that's a clue? A clue that Borges was also being silly and making fun of self-important bad writers. She mimicked a scolding professorial basso. No, Aura, wrong. Silly, okay, bad writers? That's not how we read texts here, Aura. The red and pink tassels of yarn dangling like bunches of dwarf bananas, 3 on each side, from the Andean ear flaps of Aura's ridiculous pointy wool hat, and the spiky red tassel that crowned it, jiggled in unison with her bobbing cheeks and the peal of her laughter. Aura was having fun too, her eyes gleaming. She'd go on like this, chattery, ebullient, all the way back to Brooklyn. Aura was discovering in those days that she wasn't like the other grad students, ideologically prohibited from considering the person and mischief of the author. She wasn't always so giddy to revel in or acknowledge those differences. She was often tormented with worry. I'm going to be expelled. They're going to take away my scholarship. They're going to send me to the gulag. Do you think Jim has a wooden leg, she asked, switching the subject to one that had lately preoccupied her. Valentina's husband, Jim, the super-rich investment banker, also quite a bit older than his wife. Hadn't I noticed? Wasn't that a wooden or prosthetic leg limp that Jim had? From the knee down, she said. His shone bone, his shanshin, what do you call it? What if she asked Valentina if Jim had a wooden leg, and it turned out that he didn't? Would she be offended? Valentina was already so insecure about how prematurely aged Jim looked that she wouldn't let him come anywhere near Columbia. Well, even if his shin is made of cheese, I said, it won't be just some ordinary camembert. That guy makes a ton of money. Ay, mi amor, she said sweetly, que tonto eres. One night a few months later, coming out of a movie, we let ourselves lag behind Valentina and Jim on the sidewalk so that I could study his walk. Maybe he does, I thought. That summer, they invited us to their country house, and we went swimming. Arthritic stiffness was all it was. Waiting for the train to Brooklyn, listening, looking down into her face, so full of puppyish excitement and her own particular innocence. What was that innocence? What was Auda innocent of that I wasn't? Much past experience, a failure and disappointment. Was love making me innocent again, wiping that history away? Auda was innocent of the power of her own gifts, and that, her innocent promise and humility, sometimes made her seem so fragile to me. At such moments, there on the subway platform, practically dizzy with love for her, I would sense how vulnerable she was, so caught up in her own excitement, not paying attention, so physically slight, to a shove from behind by some fiendish lunatic off his medication into the path of an oncoming train. This recurring fear of a crazed subway pusher was sometimes so strong that I would almost feel the urge to push her off the platform myself, as if the fiendish lunatic was me and I needed to get the inevitable over with, or as if I just couldn't endure so much love and happiness one more second, and simultaneously, in a silent burst of panic, I'd pull her to safety, away from the edge of the platform. My hands were on her waist or on her shoulders. I would gently pull her back into the mass of waiting passengers and put my own body between her and the tracks and give her a relieved kiss on the cheek. I never understood it, this awful urge to push her off the subway platform while simultaneously pulling her to safety, rescuing her from phantom fiends, but also from myself. Thanks. Oh, that's our little
Yes, it's our little
soiree
alcove.
corner.
Yeah. I was kind of stunned by how many damn phones were going off. I felt like this was MIT minus. Yeah? Come on, man. Yeah, man.
Casa
For
Chica.
real. My poor students, I think because mostly their phones can activate other people's experiments, so they turn that shit off.
They can, really?
Yeah. Not, of course, 90%
Or
of them
blow up,
that
like-
won't happen, but
Blow up a rival's experiment in a
Yeah.
lab or something?
I can't sit, you guys. I have a bad back, so
I'll
it's
stand.
the way. Nah, take a seat or lean. It makes me.
It's
Yeah.
kind of low down here anyway.
Well, that was a wonderful reading, Frank. I think we don't have much time. Yeah, we're only going to talk for a few minutes, so there's not really room for a wide-ranging conversation.
I want to tell you an anecdote about yourself.
Madame.
3 weeks ago, it was a reunion of alumni, and they had seen that you were coming. And an alumni, I didn't know her.
Who?
I have been here as alumni.
Oh, alumni, yeah.
I have been in this college for 39 years, so you probably were 15 when I was teaching here, so maybe I met you. But anyway, this lady told me, oh, you are so lucky, Francisco Goldman is coming. Francisco Goldman is coming, and you are going to cry so much. You are going to cry so much. And I told her, I don't cry, I take pills. I don't cry. And so, of course, she was amused because I said, I don't cry. And she said, oh, yes, you are going to cry. So she gave me her card, and she told me, after today, if you cry, please write me an email and tell me if you have cried. Well, I don't cry, but I didn't know you. I mean, I'm professor of Spanish
Yeah.
literature, not of Latino authors. But immediately I went to the internet, and of course I read about your wife and whatever it is, you know, the advertising for that book, which is quite a bit of things. I recognize what you said, what a wonderful author. But but still I didn't cry. Thank you very, very much. You are a wonderful, wonderful author. And
Thank
I'm going
you.
to buy your books.
Thank you so much. You might remember, my mother is a very close friend from Guatemala. Worked here in the Women's Studies Center, the Women's Center. She was Odette Alarcón. Does anybody remember her?
Oh, yes, Odette Alarcón. She is a writer too, no?
Yeah, well, yeah, not a fiction, but yeah, she was a very powerful thinker. She ran this historic study. I was so proud the day it got written up, I remember. Because we never thank my mom's friends, you know. And there she was, this big article in the Times. She ran this 30-year study on Latina girls' self-image, starting with, I think, only Puerto Ricans, beginning like when they were 5, and tracking them into adulthood. It was a very, very profound, important study.
Your wife's name, of course, is Carlos Fuentes' novel.
Well, yeah, her mom named her for that because, you know, they were kind of hippies, and that was like the trendy hippie book back in, yeah, oh yeah. Very good.
That was an astonishing intervention. Yeah, thank you, Madame. Thank you. Yeah, I meant that most sincerely, you guys. My mom always points out that I'm like almost incapable of sarcasm, yet I'm always read as that. Yeah. So, you know, Frank, I actually was thinking about, you know, an enormous sort of topic, but specifically the multiple identities that you have as a writer. I mean, I always remember when you were working on The Divine Husband, and we used to have these conversations about bilocation.
Yeah.
Remember that? And so I'm wondering, what is your sense of it? What is your sense of being simultaneously a journalist, simultaneously a novelist, and then the other areas that you work in as well? How do you talk to people about that? Do you find that sometimes people are privileging one identity over the other, or do you find yourself being able to juggle it with people, or defending one versus the other depending on where you're at?
Well, I think sometimes it's the latter. I think sometimes you're aware, you know, the person you are inside yourself is kind of immune in some ways to what other people might be thinking or judging or summing you up, you know. And for instance, I rarely think of myself as a journalist, right? Even though I've done some journalism, a big book of journalism, right? But I think identity is constantly, it's very fluid, and the thing that just totally, that's very hard to talk about is how has death changed all of that. You know, there was a whole set of neatly constructed cells that were going along developing, right? One that had this very certain idea of what a novel was supposed to be, you know, and what kind of novels I wanted to write, you know, and the other person who thought, yes, you know, the journalist you're talking about, the person who seems like overtly engaged in the world, right? And the person who thought he knew about violence and wrote about violence and was ready to, you know, rumble with the kind of people I had to rumble with. You know, in Guatemala, for example, one of them was about to become president, you know, and then just every kind of idea I ever had about myself was swept away, you know, July 25th, 2007. You know, since then, I read an essay by Roberto Colasso where he talked about how he had founded this line of books called Delphi Books. It's called the Libro Único line. Libro Único, you know, like a unique book, which means these are books, they specifically looked for books that kind of were never meant to be written. You know, they weren't part of a writer's aesthetic plan. You know, he's not there like developing his idea of the novel. You know, in some cases they were, you know, maybe this writer only wrote one book his whole life, or they were debating. He said the thing that, what is a libro unico? A libro unico is a book that you pick it up, the reader picks it up, and he immediately notes that something has happened to the author. And the author has ended up depositing that something in a text, and that's what writing this book was. I mean, when this happened, I felt totally separated from whoever it was who'd written the earlier novels. I have a revulsion to violence now. People have been trying to drag me into this election. I just can't do. I just don't want to talk about it. I can't. I feel like I didn't know about violence. I could write about it, but until 2007, when it shattered my life, and I really learned what trauma was. I feel like I didn't know about it before, even though I'd been around it so much. I think that's what, even writing this book, I remember a few weeks after the accident happened, a few months after rather, that very kind lady in Italy, Beatrice, had invited me to her residence to just chill. And John Banville came by, the great Irish writer. And he was like, oh, well, of course someday you're going to write about this, but it will take you like 4 or 5 years before you understand it well enough. And I was like, oh, that's really sage advice.
I love the formula.
Yeah, I love the formula, but like, what am I gonna do in the meantime? It's like, that's a long time. And I just started writing that book out of that sort of total space of shock and trauma, and I think that whoever I am now, honestly I say it sounds like a joke that I don't know, that I'm starting over, but that's the way I am now, that voice, and some of the old me is, the old selves are in that voice, but life started over. It's basically, it's that simple. Everything started over 4 years ago. And even now, as I think about I'm going to write another novel now. I'm starting, but I know it's going to be very different from the other ones. So in a way, this process of discovering again.
And the book was the book was written very differently, and just even the time-wise, it was very different than everything else. I mean, I'd never seen you in such a I don't know what the word is.
Well, the thing that was incredible about it, and I think here, this is interesting. This is something a friend of ours pointed out, Toy Bin, Colin.
Oh, Colin, yeah.
He said that he saw in certain ways how the last 2 books had almost prepared me to write this one. Because Divine Husband is so much about the yearning for love when you don't have it, and Art of Political Murder, because it was such a difficult case, it was such a dangerous case. It was really the kind of story where you felt, if I make a mistake, you might get someone hurt. And it was so important to get rid of all writerly vanity and try and come up with just the most transparent, agile, clear, coherent prose to deliver that story. And then in a weird way, so the 2 books, and kind of forensic writing too, right? Like, and the styles sort of merged, because this book's very much about love. But it was also had to be written with great humility. I can't tell you, a really holy humility. You can't show off with a subject like this, right? My remember, this like you had to make, Auda gets all the best lines in the book, like she got in life anyway. But it really was so important that I serve the story, not in any way try to call attention to myself, which is something I'd sort of found myself practicing with Art of Political Murder in a strange way. So there's some consistency in that way.
Yeah, I think it's, literally as when you're in this role of interlocutor, the more swiftly you can disappear, the better. and I think it's almost time for questions. I did want to respond to something you said, Frank, which is very clear for those of us who've been certainly reading your book for a while and who've dedicated themselves to sort of thinking about how the work works, the significance of the work, and certainly how it inspires me. I have always found in my heart that one usually has a very diverse bookshelf when one is a reader. There is a number of books, and we draw sustenance from all of them. It's hard to create, a hierarchy from a childish book that you threw away and that no one will ever write a dissertation on versus a book that's sort of considered cardinal when it comes to the canon. But certainly, of all the books that I love and I draw strength in all the writers, I've always been sort of inexorably drawn to writers who, for some reason or another, are these Persephone types, which is they're always going into the underworld, into this place where so few of us wish to go. And they're always returning with, instead of news of the underworld, it seems that the only thing that we can return with from the underworld is news of the world. And what's extraordinary is every one of your books has a Persephone function. In every one there is a journey to some remote margin and for of course entirely different books. You would never think, if I changed the name of these books, that the same damn person wrote the shit. It's kind of an extraordinary diversity. And I think that this is, for me, I've never understood where one person summons that kind of courage, to do this repeatedly. Now, of course, Frank, you can respond, but I also wanted to just say, we're going to open this now for questions. Frank, you'll take the questions directly.
Thanks,
No, thank you. And have at it, young people. Good luck, Frank.
Thanks, Junot. I don't have to tell you guys how much I admire Junot. It's I wouldn't. When they asked Norman Mailer once, they asked him why he was such a failure, and he said because he didn't feel his contemporaries were good enough, so they didn't challenge him to be better. I feel like writing at the same time as Junot is writing, I always feel like I'm in dialogue with him, and he sets the standard, and I admire him so much, and he's really, I'm proud that we're such good friends, but a lot of our friends, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I thought the reading was very beautiful, but clearly you are writing in celebration of Aura. However, because you are writing after her death, the loss organizes everything that you do in the writing. So even your choice of events, like for example, the lift, the elevator that gets shut off, or the subway station and missing,
Yeah.
missing out and so on. All those locations are saturated with anxiety. At least the Francisco figure in the story
Yeah.
is very anxious. They're all anxiety-inducing moments. So my question is, if you were to have written this when she was alive, how would you have organized?
Yeah.
This is a kind of hypothetical question.
Yeah.
You're writing after it, but if you were writing, if you were still alive and you were writing to celebrate her life, how would it have impacted?
Well, the book is, that is the premonition chapter. That's one chapter that's specifically devoted to that theme of, and obviously the book is, most of all, an attempt to celebrate Aura, but of course it's enfolded in this experience of grief, and some chapters more than others. But that's such an essential part of going through that kind of sudden violent loss. Is the mind is just constantly going back and thinking, was there a sign? Could something have been done differently? Was I just not paying attention? Was there something I missed, right? And the mind obsessively does that for years, And I think that chapter, in some sense, was just trying to tell you about that. And as I was writing, actually doing it, right? Wondering, were these things that didn't look like premonitions back then, if I had paid more attention, might I have noticed. But the other thing too, and I think this is a theme. It's like the classic Proustian theme too. Is like how love and happiness are always haunted by people's fear of them ending. It's unsustainable. I don't pretend me and Ada would have been that happy for 30 years. We would have had ups and downs. This happens. We have 4 years of freight train happiness straight ahead. And I used to just constantly say, how can this be happening? I was not that happy a guy before, And so, and of course, I used to even feel, then, even when at the height of my happiness, and when I end there in that chapter, when I go, I don't understand it, this crazy feeling. I didn't understand it, but it had something to do with like a fear of happiness ending. Like okay, this is too much to be this happy. Let's get this over with. Let's go back to being unhappy, because that's what most people are. It's something like that goes on. It's Proust is obsessed with that emotion, right? Yes. Thanks.
It's wonderful reading. Thank you very much. A wonderful book. Even though I know it's a novel, that's very slippery. It's hard to sort of keep it as a novel.
Yeah.
When you have all the sort of documents inside and the photographs, even though of course we would imagine a novel, but that's stuff in it anyway. So, and I hear you call it a book.
I call it a book.
Yeah. So, so I see it even on the sort of inside cover. I was telling my students, I said, see, it's a novel. But so I was wondering why you shaped it as a novel, or what kind of shaping of the material, calling it a novel, or going with that.
There's so many ways to answer that. Thanks. Thanks for your question too, but that was a great question, and this is the essential question that comes up a lot with this book. Let's just first accept that the traditional, oldest definition of a novel, it's a very open form, right? It's always been able to contain what gets called nonfiction now. I heard Toby Wolfe this summer at a writers' conference. Somebody sent it to me. He said, for me, there's just fiction and nonfiction. What people nowadays call creative nonfiction is what we used to call fiction. But when I started writing this, I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was just writing this the way I needed to write it. And I wasn't, I didn't take an advance. I turned down all offers of an advance. I just was very lonely with it. I almost needed to be poor, and kept it close and wrote it how I wanted to, and so what took shape, right? You really see who you are when you're writing that way. One is that, I'm writing the book in a certain way to sort of commune with Auda, right? It was like keeping her with me, part of it, but it was also trying to say a greater thing. And that's what becomes a novel. You're searching for a form. All novels are a search for a form. You're privileging form over content, right? Which is what, when you write journalism, it's all about the content. And so I just wasn't paying any, it would have been so against the spirit of everything out it was to suddenly become a reporter and say things have to be told in the exact order they happened and exactly, when I felt like if I was thinking back on something and thought, well, somehow my memory of the actual events are too pale. I need to sort of really find out what I felt about that day. I'm going to, get in there and really reimagine it. And sometimes, so it was, and again, in the end, there was because Auda was so, she taught me so much. She totally made me a better reader, a smarter reader, a more ambitious reader, a more ambitious writer, a sharper writer. She brought so many new ideas about literature to me that I was determined to, I always had the idea that I was trying to write something she would like, right? Which meant being, creative. Now, on the more mundane level, super mundane, just to get it out of the way quickly, it's not a romantic clef. When we get into the grief part especially, so many people alive now who were mixed up with me, and it was so important to protect their privacy. And so it wasn't just a matter of, I'm going to change this and change that. You really had to fictionalize. You really had to make up entirely new people to convey certain experiences you'd had. So even that is, so there's a bunch of things like that. Thanks. Yeah. Yes.
Actually, following up on that, one of the things that I found really delightful in reading the book was how much you and our and even and particularly in the passage that you read today, which is making fun of the professors who can't read Jorge's as well as she can. I wonder, I've often thought, and particularly recently, as we've had so many wonderful writers come here, that writers make better critics than literary critics, and I'm speaking as a literary critic. So I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about the way that writers read. Do they? The way they
That's a great question. Well, I think that, yeah. Well, she was a better reader than me. But I think that in this case, they understand the choices that are being made. They don't forget that there's a flesh and blood person, right? And that very flesh and blood person is what so drives some more theoretical critics crazy, right? What to do with that flesh and blood person who's sitting there writing about this. And there's all sorts of ways to theorize that person sort of out of existence. And some of them are intellectually justified. I understand the argument. But for a writer, that's impossible, right? And so immediately out of, again, the Borges scene, she sees that Borges is being silly. And you realize that Borges loved to be silly. Even in his works and in life, and she instinctively, grasps that, and I think in the same way, I think a writer doesn't have any problem understanding why in a book this personal, you wouldn't necessarily want to limit yourself by genre, right? The need to be free. Right, and sometimes certain critics are more hung up on what genre and why is it, and so I something like that, it's a great question, but yeah, I think, yes.
I'd like to add something to that. You did talk about, in the beginning, the relationship between the practice of writing and the study of literature, which is, literary criticism, and I cannot agree with you more that if you have to abandon, your love or passion or what this person at Columbia calls naiveness in literature, like in order to study literature, why bother even reading a text?
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could maybe talk about the role, because I'm sure some of the students here are studying literature, and maybe in terms of how we could read literature and more precisely the role of literary criticism, especially in this time of everything's becoming digitalized, and how we should approach a new sort of kind of literature.
Right. What do you mean by a new kind of literature?
Like different genres that you were talking about.
Yeah. Well, I see that where I teach. I see that, first of all, I think that you need, really democratic departments that offer you all kinds of different things. There's not just one right way. I would never, neither would I would have said, don't study theory. Theory is even I, who am a dunce with theory, get so much out of it. You know, it's almost like mental gymnastics, and it just even if I read 30 pages in a fog, suddenly a window will pop open. You know, some insight, and I'll just find myself thinking a little bit more, differently about something. But on the other hand, I think what writers can do, that I'm always amazed that so many, not to, I feel bad, it's not a criticism, it's just that I see that for instance, when certain writers want to teach contemporary fiction in a class, I'm amazed sometimes at my school that so many of them are still like teaching Garcia Marquez, like that's cutting edge. It's like they got frozen in time. They have what they think of as the canon, and I think it's important. I think one thing I really try hard to do in the classes I teach is try to excite my students about the very writers that are feeding the dialogue among my contemporaries and one's inner dialogue, right? And try and bring that across. The very writers that are shaping how we're thinking about fiction right now, which can be an extremely eclectic bunch of, Junot knows this better than anybody, can be, yeah? Oh, yeah, so I mean, I teach this course, I just call it Not Realism, and we, and we start with Lovecraft and Kafka, and go through, we include Oscar Wilde, we include some science fiction, we include, it's just put everything in the pot. And then to instead of just bores me so much to read a straight academic paper. So like the week we read the week we read Ficciones, I say, okay, write a paper about a time you felt you were in a labyrinth, and when we read The Loser by Thomas Bernhard, which is just amazing, book about it's about jealousy, right? Written about the guy who thought he was going to be a great pianist and ends up in the Mozarteum studying with Glenn Gould, and just has to realize, I'm not a genius and I'm never going to be a genius, and his rage, So I say, think of something that just really wounds you and write me a rant about it, and that's the paper. And I guess that's a way of getting the students a little closer to the actual human ferment, that's behind the books, right? Yet, while also introducing them to incredible books, that they're not getting from people who are still thinking, oh yeah, Garcia Marquez, that's really, I love Garcia Marquez, but at this moment, he's not really somebody that is engaging ideas about the novel right now in the way other writers are, right? Junot.
I was going to say, just to raise the question of sort of giving the devil his due, which is that her due. We both teach creative writing, and this is something that comes up. I mean, we can say whatever we want about literary criticism or any kind of criticism, but my kids who do criticism, they read. Like, you can't come in and want to do literary criticism and say, I don't like to read.
Yeah.
But this is actually very common in creative writing.
It's scary comment.
The enormous amount of not only creative writing students who don't want to read, but how many times have I been on panels with serious, respected, established writers who say, I don't read. I've got too much on my hands with my own work to bother with reading.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, like, how...
Well, that's what I was saying. I was thinking of other creative writing teachers where I teach. And I'm just amazed that it's like contemporary novel and it stops at Garcia Marquez. I'm like, what? Because they don't have that desire to read voraciously as I think you have, obviously. And I think that, look, I mean, to me, a model now, and is Roberto Bolaño. I think Roberto Bolaño is somebody who's really, Roberto Bolaño, and right now Cesar Aira, right? In other languages, if we talk about just writers outside, English language have just really opened up ideas about the novel. And if you start to read them, you see how much everything they've produced is part of an incredible interrogation of contemporary novelistic traditions and ancient ones. They don't just read in Spanish, you know, and that's a kind of conversation that is harder to find for some reason, as June was just saying, in the American creative writing community, definitely, you know, and you know, I have formed my syllabus now, you know, in a kind of attempt to mesh American ideas about literature with what Bolaño and Ida were bringing to the conversation. You know, it's
But of course, we have to read the classics.
yeah, well, of course, yeah. Well, we start, yeah.
That's another thing.
Yeah.
Americans, they don't know the classics. I mean, the classics, in my case, are the Spanish classics, of course. And for instance, no one reads Don Quixote, and everything is in there. Every Bolaños is in Don Quixote. You are in Don Quixote. Have you read Don Quixote?
Of course I have, yeah.
You're lucky, because the majority of people don't.
Last question, yeah.
I am actually a high school student now, and I've been looking into colleges. And one thing I've noticed over and over again is, though I'm looking to be a creative writing major, every college has about 200 English majors on Hawthorne or stuff like that, which I get is important.
Yeah, it's very
But I
important.
find about 4 classes on actual creative writing. And I was wondering, as established writers who know what you're doing and know how to get there, do those classes on like past writers help you? Because it sounded a lot like you were saying a minute ago that the learning critical thinking is very different and separate from learning to write. I was wondering if I had mistaken you on that.
I don't think so. I think that it's I think it's part of a good education. You know, I think that if you just it depends, right? But I mean, I think what Auda came up against was a department that was just privileging only theory, right? And taking a certain attitude, a very hard attitude against literature, which you'll learn about when you get into, you know, why that happens. That's in your future. That became very controversial. I mean, people ended up fired. It wasn't like just so easy. You know, if you talk to people at Columbia, what went on in the Spanish department there is legendary now. You know, it's, but I think that it's more important to take literature classes than creative writing classes, without a doubt. I took only one creative writing class as an undergrad, one, and it was very important to me. But I'll never forget the year I spent. It was a year-long survey that I had as a freshman that changed my life on American literature. A brilliant professor, and I just, you know, it gave me the foundation, you know, of a sense of the American literary tradition, you know. That was just, I'll never forget the hours I spent in the library just trying to, you know, write papers on Hawthorne specifically, you know. And it's, you know, as even now, you know, I get criticized a lot at Trinity. Not criticized, but no one ever sees me there except for the day I teach, right? Which is one day a week, and then no one could believe it last year when I suddenly walked on campus on a day I didn't have to teach. But the reason I did was because they were doing a marathon reading of Moby Dick, and I'm such a Moby Dick nerd that I wasn't going to miss it for anything, you know.
Thank you for reaffirming my faith in the college system.
Thank you, Francisco Junot. Thanks for a fabulous
Thank you all very much.